why don't you tell me a little bit about how I kind of know from the catalogs and things like that. I remember seeing that one catalog where you're just a kid almost.
Yeah.
And on the cover you're holding up fish or something like that. And I thought, boy, now he's the president of the company.
Well, I grew up in the business, of course, because my dad got in it in the 1950s, and so.
And your dad is the one who had the
Sports
sports
shop.
shop.
Right. And then eventually he got out of the retail sporting goods business and just sold MEPPS spinners.
Now, okay, let's backtrack a little. How did your, go through the story again.
Okay. When World War II ended, there were a lot of GIs, of course, in Europe. And as they came home, like if they were stationed in France, these guys that were fishermen would bring back Mitchell reels and MEPPS spinners with them because they could see, wow, that's some stuff like we don't have at home.
Yeah.
And so that's really how MEPPS and Mitchell got started here in the United States.
Did you guys have a hand in Mitchell at all?
No,
Okay.
but it was a French
Yeah.
company. And anyway, a GI who came home to Anigo had met somebody at the MEPPS company in France, and he brought some MEPPS spinners and gave them to my dad to use.
So he was friends with your dad?
Yeah.
He used to go into his sports shop?
Right.
Okay.
So my dad really wasn't impressed with him, looked at him. But one day, after it was some years after that, he was out fishing and he wasn't catching anything, and he was looking at his tackle and he saw those MEPPS spinners. He thought, well, I'll try one of those, and he caught a bunch of fish on it. So at that point he thought, oh, I should start selling those. So he went back.
He was quite the entrepreneur then.
Yeah.
He had that nose for that kind of thing.
So he went back to this GI and asked him, well, can you get more of those? And so the guy contacted the people in France, and he could get more.
Was who he contacted the MEPPS company?
It was somebody at the MEPPS company, right. And this went on for a number of years, where he would get MEPPS spinners from France, sell them to my dad, and then my dad would sell them in his retail store.
Okay. So it was kind of a little side business for that GI?
Yeah.
You remember his name?
Yeah, his name was Frank Velick, and he was a bartender in one of the local establishments here.
That's neat.
And one day, this Frank Velick came into my dad's sports shop, and he had a letter. And my dad looked at the letter, and in summation it said, this is to inform you that I'm going to be the new importer of MEPPS spinners into the United States. And my dad looked at that letter and he said, Frank, you better get hold of an attorney, have him write up a contract, and go over to France.
So Frank was going to be the new importer?
No, Frank was the guy who was bringing the spinners in and selling them.
So he got a letter from MEPPS?
From somebody else. Well, it was a guy by the name of George Bame. And he had actually been in France working on the reconstruction after the war.
Okay.
So apparently he met people at the MEPPS company, and
He had the same idea.
yeah, somehow it probably was evolved that we're selling MEPPS to this guy over in the United States, and here's what he's been purchasing. And so George Beam sent him this letter that said, I'm going to be the new importer of MEPPS into the United States. And my dad told Frank Velick, the GI, you need to get hold of an attorney and have him write up a contract and go over to France and get that contract signed. So Frank did that. He went over to France with the contract, and he came home and the contract was unsigned. So
he couldn't get them to sign it?
no, they apparently were allied with this George Bame, who had been over there under the Reconstruction.
And where was he from?
I'm not sure where he was from, actually. But then my dad contacted the French MEPPS company and said, look, I'm the guy that's actually been selling MEPPS here in the United States, and I want to continue to do that. So the MEPPS company suggested, well, why don't you and George Boehm form a partnership then? So that's what they did, and it was kind of like mixing oil with water, you know,
Oh.
they just never saw eye to eye on anything. And they operated as Boehm Sheldon for about 5 years.
And where did,
And it was here in Antigo. George Boehm moved back to the States
Oh.
and to Antigo.
oh, okay.
So they worked together for 5 years, and there was enough problems that eventually, the way the corporation was set up, my dad was on the board of directors and had a vote. George Boehm was on the board of directors and had a vote, and the French company had a vote. So George Boehm contacted the French people and said, we're gonna have our annual meeting, can I have a proxy for your vote? And so they gave it to him, and he called a meeting and he voted my dad out of the company. And the way the contract was structured, George Boehm was the official importer of MEPPS spinners to the United States. And my dad was the official sales operation. So George Boehm could import, but he couldn't sell. And my dad could sell, but he couldn't get the product unless it was
Yeah.
through George Boehm. So at that point, they decided, well, somebody needs to buy somebody out. So my dad bought George Boehm out of the business.
And how did that go? I mean, was it amicable or?
I think it went fine, you know, they just agreed on a price, and I would guess, you know, probably wasn't, well, here's my offer, and oh, that's good. It probably was some negotiation, and
Yeah.
came up with a price, and my dad bought the company, or bought Boehm out.
And that was 5 years after.
Yeah,
they
that
started.
was sometime, I'm thinking it must have been around 1960 or so.
Hmm.
And then, so, then my dad was the exclusive distributor for the United States.
So he was both importer and
Yeah,
salesman,
for
seller.
the United States, and he had a 5-year contract. So, in 1972, there was a lady at the MEPPS company in France who could speak English. She was the only one who could speak English, so our orders always went to her, and, you know, she made sure they were handled and that. She called my dad and said one of the partners at the MEPPS company wanted to retire, and so he was gonna sell his half of the business. So my dad went over to France and bought half of the business.
Okay.
And,
And who owned the other half?
well, there was 2 partners. There was Andre Molnar was one. He was the actual guy who ran the business and had the original idea for MEPPS spinner. And then the other guy they called a silent partner, but apparently he was like brought money into the business to
Okay.
start it. His name was Ferdinand Elias, and he was the one that sold out.
Okay.
And then these guys were both in 1972. They were in their 70s, and a year or 2 later, Mr. Molnar decided he wanted to sell out too. So then my dad bought the second half of the
Bought the
business.
whole shebang.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it still continues over there. You know, they were a customer yet, but they have a lot of other customers in Europe and
How long had they
Canada.
been in business before your
Well,
dad got involved?
The original invention of MEPPS spinner was in 1938. And I
Oh,
don't
that
think-
long ago?
Yeah, it wasn't much of a business at that time. Andre Molnar was a steel buyer for the Peugeot automobile company. But he liked to fish and tinker with things, so he invented the MEPPS spinner. Just
Do you have any idea how he came about that design and everything like that?
not really.
I wonder what sparked that in him to see that little turning blade and everything.
I don't know.
That'd be interesting to know.
I remember my dad talking about going over to his house when he would have a new idea for a spinner and watching him pull it through the bathtub at his house.
That's cool. That's neat. So then your dad, he became the, well, did he form, because at what point did he close down his sporting goods shop and just do this?
Oh, that would have been in the 50s, the
Oh, earlier.
1950s. Yeah,
Okay.
it was before George Boehm, sent the letter over that said, I'm going to be the new importer of MEPPS.
Okay. So how much, I don't mean to get personal with money and stuff, but how much was he selling enough to justify giving up the one business and to start this business? Was MEPPS, was it like a wildfire type of lure in the, I mean, what convinced him to just go into MEPPS spinners?
Well, I think he could see the potential, and it got to where it was just taking enough time that he couldn't do both.
Okay, yeah. And how old were you when all this was going on?
Well, I was born in 1950, so,
Okay.
I...
So you were conceived right at the beginning of this
Yeah.
whole MEPS thing. Okay.
My dad, during the 1940s, my uncle was living in Illinois, and he called up my dad and he said, there's a bankrupt cheese company down here that I think if you bought it, you could turn it around and make some money doing that. So my dad moved down to Illinois, Mattoon, Illinois, and bought this, back when there was a cheese factory on every mile or so out in the country. He bought
like a bar, did it?
yeah, he bought a cheese factory and did whatever it took to turn it around. I've heard him talk about long, hot days working there. But after 5 years, he sold the cheese company and he moved back to Anigo.
Okay.
And that would have been in 1950.
Okay. Interesting. So, at that point then, after your dad purchased MEPPS in France, then when was this building built?
This building was built in 1972.
Okay.
There's a building over by the Dairy Queen, just on the north side of the road, where the squirrel tail sign is.
Yeah.
That was the original factory that he built in 1962.
There's a deer over there.
Yeah, they had there's a nursing home right there, and they have a fenced-in area with deer,
Yeah.
so
I
that
just
people
thought
living there can see them, watch them.
2 deer walking by. Anyway.
1962, they built the place over on the highway, and then in 1972, they built here.
Okay.
So we still use that other building.
Okay. What did you do with the old sign that said squirrel tails wanted?
It was falling apart, so we just took it down, and I really liked the looks of that
Yeah.
old sign with routed out
Yeah.
lettering and stuff and wood, but I don't know if they couldn't find anybody to do a sign like that, or
Oh.
if it was too expensive, but
Yeah, that was neat.
I like that sign.
Yeah, with the orange lettering and all. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was cool.